A.A. Bronson joins me now from Berlin, Germany. Hi, A.A.
Hi there.
And Adrian Stimson joins me from Siksika Nation in Alberta. Hi, Adrian.
Hello, Tom.
So, A.A., I should point out the obvious. You're known as A.A. Bronson, but you were born Michael Timms, and that's actually the name I can see on your Zoom call there right now.
That's right.
Your great-grandfather was a man named Reverend John William Timms. Who was he?
He was the first Anglican missionary to Siksika Nation just after Treaty 7, when the reserves were first set up. So he was sent out from London to come and do what missionaries did. But he built a church, he built a house for himself, he built a residential school, he took the children away from their parents, he forbade them to speak their own language or practice their own customs or wear their own clothes, and he did his best to destroy Siksika culture.
Adrian, on your side, you belong to the Siksika Nation in Alberta, where you live and where we're talking to you right now. Your great-grandfather was a chief named Old Sun. Who was he?
Chief Old Sun, or Natusapi, was my great-great-great-grandfather and was the leader of a number of people on the nation. He was one of the signatories to Treaty 7 at the time when the treaty was made in 1877. Well-respected leader, and also a little bit of a naysayer, in a sense, to the treaties. He was highly suspicious of the newcomers. And I know that there are stories that he didn't want to sign treaty, but in the end acquiesced. So he was a bit of a rebel and also a very fearless leader.
And A.A., your two, Adrian's great-great-grandfather and your great-grandfather were sort of adversaries, am I right?
By the family stories, they were arch enemies, yes.
So the genesis for this project centers around the Siksika Rebellion of 1895. Adrian, briefly, can you tell us the story of what we know happened at that time?
It's interesting because there's very little information here at Siksika on that. There is the knowledge that a conflict happened around that time and that the church was burnt. But as far as any sort of written documentation, there was very little. But the stories passed on through generations always indicated that there was this moment when the residential schools were first opened, and due to the there was some diseases going around at the time, and the children were dying, and sadly, Reverend Timms would not allow those children to go home. So you can imagine the sadness and anger that the parents felt, and it was through those parents that the Reverend Timms was actually warned to leave the nation. And following that was the burning down of the school and such.
A.A., this is such a big part of your family's history, and you've said for a while that you've been meaning to address this part of your family's history. In fact, you said something interesting. You said something along the lines of, I've been hurtling towards this project for 7 decades. So why was now the right time?
Well, I guess there's different ways of answering that. One way of answering it is that the Canada Council brought out a grant for the 150th anniversary of Canada and invited people to dream up projects that addressed the 150 years of Canadian history. And since I've been meaning to do something with this all my life, it became the obvious time to do it. Also, I'm 74 now, so if I don't do it soon, I won't get to do it at all. And also, as time has gone by, I think for everyone, the relationship to these stories, our relationships to these stories has been shifting and changing. And now I feel like it's a time when people can hear it, and some people at least. And even, I don't know, 10 years ago might not have been possible. So I moved ahead.
I should point out for people listening that, Adrian, you're a residential school survivor. You attended 3 residential schools as a day student. Was there any cynicism about this apology, either from you or from your community?
Well, I think when it comes to apologies, there's often a lot of cynicism. I think that there's always sort of the saying, walk the talk. And certainly, when apologies are given, often the walk afterwards is a sort of either non-existent or very slow. And so, yes, there is cynicism. But also, when AA first approached us, and then I in turn went to the elders and asked them, one of the elders, Myrna, sort of indicated that it's not too often that somebody comes to us with an apology. And it's perhaps very important that we listen to it. And so really that cynicism sort of went away at that point, and sort of genuinely we decided that, no, this is important. Let's listen to him. And he's approaching us in the right way. So I think that for us, we put that aside at that time and move forward.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the apologies themselves. So AA, this all came to fruition at the Toronto Biennial last September. You performed 2 public apologies at the Biennial. I wonder if you could paint a picture for us. Could you describe, tell me about those apologies?
Oh, what can I say? I mean, the apology is a pre-written text, which also exists as a small book, and so by delivering the apology, essentially, I read the text, and I don't think I could have done it any other way. It would have been impossible to just do it off the top of my head. It was a deeply emotional event. Actually, I thought maybe I would offer to read 2 or 3 pages from it if you're willing.
Sure, go ahead.
I mean, you can always edit me down.
No, I wouldn't dare. You go right ahead.
I speak to Old Sun, the great Siksika chief, after whom the Siksika residential school was named, great-grandfather, apparently great-great-great-grandfather, to Adrian Stimson. I speak to Red Crow and Chief White Pup and Crowfoot, and to Three Bulls, and to the other great Siksika chiefs of the late 19th century, to the Siksika children who Reverend Timms forbade to speak their own language, to those children then separated from their parents, partitioned from their own culture, forbidden to perform their own rituals or eat their own foods, prevented from attending their own dances, especially the circle camp or the sun dance, to all the children who were abused at Old Sun Industrial School, whether physically, sexually, emotionally, or spiritually, to all those children who escaped the Old Sun Industrial School and who were caught and returned, and to those who escaped and did not return, to the Siksika parents who were denied access to their beloved children, especially in 1895, when the European scourge of diphtheria and tuberculosis broke out in the school and the children were dying. To the children who died then in that fateful year and were not allowed to see their parents in their last days, I speak to Henry Scratching Hyde, his son, one of the first to die, who killed the stockman Frank Skinner, called Owl Eyes, and was in turn killed, and especially to Mabel Cree, the child who died of diphtheria in Old Sun Industrial School without her parents, and to those who mourned Mabel Cree, to White Pup, and to Big Road, and to Calf Child, and to Red Old Man, and to the others whose names I cannot know, to her father, Greasy Forehead, and to her mother, and to her uncle, the Wood, who came to confront the Reverend Timms and was admonished for using the front door and sent to the kitchen door, and to all Mabel Cree's relations, to the medicine men who were not allowed to attend to the dying children, and to Dr. Lindsay, the white doctor whose ministrations did not help, to the cutter who took matters into his own hands, who set out for the mission house intending to kill the Reverend Mr. Timms, but was intercepted and sent home, and to Mr. William Baker, the farm instructor, who intercepted him and sent him home, to Maple's mother, who also went to the house with drawn knife, but was taken away by 3 men. I speak to those who stood in front of that same doomed house chanting Tim's name as they shot stray dogs. I speak to White Pup, Big Road, and Calf Child, who protected the lives of other white settlers in exchange for the ability to mourn Mabel Cree in their own homes. I speak to Running Rabbit, to head old man and to little chief, and I invoke the family story. I speak to those who set fire then to the mission and to the church and to Old Sun Industrial School and burnt them to the ground. I speak to all those who participated in the Siksika uprising of 1895.
Hey, thank you for reading that. That's A.A. Bronson reading from a public apology to Siksika Nation. Adrian, how do you feel just hearing that just then?
It still resonates, and a big breath. It still resonates, and it's very touching. And so for me, it was something that, somebody actually is listening to us, and somebody actually sort of took the time to do the research. And for us, and I know for me, it resonates still as AA speaks it. And it's really important for the Canadian public to sort of realize and research this history and feel this history and, understand and empathize. And so I think when it comes to ideas of conciliation, when the government apologizes, that's fine. And a lot of people did a lot of work around that. But the real acts of conciliation happen between individuals. It's the people themselves that have to take it upon themselves to find ways of creating relationships, and it may not always end up in an apology, but at the same time, it's so important to understand that history and look to ways of repairing and recreating or creating new relationships into the future.
Hey, what do you feel when you read it, even now?
Oh, it's hard to read. Well, you know what it is. It's an invocation of the dead. It's inviting the dead to join us in considering this piece of history. And I do believe we are a community of the living and the dead. We can't escape that. The dead are part of us, and that needs to be acknowledged. And that harm that my ancestors did to Adrian's ancestors needs to be acknowledged and brought into the room, and we need to sit with that history.
It is profound to even sit with it now over Zoom, I must say. It's incredibly powerful. I want to talk about the Toronto Biennial, where that apology was read. Adrian, you responded to the apology with a few art pieces, including a dinner table and a wall of photos. I found this really powerful to look at as well. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
You bet. The table is called Ini Sukhkumapi, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? And based on the original meeting between AA and myself and a group of elders, and Ben Miller, who came with AA and such. So invited them to the nation. And so I took on my alter ego, Buffalo Boy, and we created a dinner and invited elders and such, and met. And it was at that dinner table that we asked the hard questions about apologies, about the history that occurred between the Reverend Tim's and this is Siksika people. And it was so it was at that table, that AA, first mentioned genocide, and then it also an important moment was when one of the elders spoke to this idea of somebody is listening to us, and how heartfelt that was. So for the response to the apology, I determined to recreate this table. And I actually had a former Old Sun residential school survivor, Gordon Littlelight, build a table for me, a facsimile of one that I researched that was very similar to the ones that were there. And then finally appointed it with fine silver and dishware and such. Of course, being the opposite to what actually would have existed at that time. And then put little bronze bison on each plate as a sort of in looking at the diner as a way of interrogating. Because a lot of my work also deals with the history of the slaughter of the bison, which is very analogous to what happened to the people. And so also a vase of white roses with one red rose, speaking to the idea of assimilation and what, aggressive assimilation the government was doing at that time. And then above it, an actual light from Old Sun Residential School. Over the years, I've collected material culture from the school as it's gone through various renovations. My mother worked there, so I was able to get access to that. And then the wall of photographs are actually part of an archive that I have of school pictures from 1955 of the Old Sun boys. And as I was looking through those pictures, it really struck me that all of those boys are now our fathers here on the nation, many who have passed and some who are still with us. So for me, it was just very, very touching in the sense that looking at these individual photographs, you could, although many were smiling, you could only imagine the heartache that existed of being taken away from their families and having to live in that school. And I certainly know that from my father's own stories of being in that place. So I really felt it was important for those photographs to be a part of the installation, in a sense, looking back at us. As AA said, this idea that, the living and the dead are all very much a part of this. So I really felt it very important to include that as well, along with the other elements.
And as Adrian mentions there, AA, you traveled to Siksika Nation. You had dinner, and I saw videos of you getting to actually tour the old residential school, which is now, I believe, a community college. Just tell me about that experience. What were you feeling while you were there?
That's complicated. Well, first of all, there's the just immense beauty of the place. This feeling of endless space and sky, which I guess anybody who's familiar with the prairies knows about. But it seemed particularly vivid there. You feel like you've stepped out of time. You're not in any particular century. You're in some timeless, vast space. And then the other thing was that, especially in the school itself, there was this intense kind of darkness, this feeling of what had happened on this site. And frankly, I don't know the school was rebuilt in brick after it burnt down, and I don't know how it stays standing. If I were Siksika, I would burn it down again if it were me. And it's a place of evil as far as I'm concerned.
Adrian,
it's wonderful that they've tried to turn it into something positive, into a community center, and something that is of service to the people. But it's a bizarre place. It's a strange place.
Yeah, there's a really powerful moment in Sean O'Neill's In the Making documentary about this, where you talk about those two things juxtaposing one another: the endless sky, the beautiful sky, and the bars and the container of the residential school, and how you would look out the window and you would see the world go on forever, knowing that you couldn't go anywhere near it. Adrian, you used conciliation earlier when you were talking about the apology, the government apologies for residential schools, and the government apologies done by Prime Minister Harper, and the government apologies done by Prime Minister Trudeau. AA, to you, is this about reconciliation, which is a term, truth and reconciliation, that's used a lot in Canada right now?
You can't have reconciliation without conciliation first. And there's never been conciliation. So I think reconciliation isn't quite the right word.
Adrian, what do you think?
Yeah, I would totally agree. Yeah, exactly what AA said. And I always sort of thought about that when the term reconciliation was used, and in the sense that it's, we've not done it before. And it's like, no, it's conciliation. It's a process of speaking to the past and looking to the future, and how do we mend this broken relationship.
And I want to point out that AA, for people listening to this, that AA didn't just kind of do this after he apologized and say, okay, well, now that's done. In fact, you address some of the questions that people might be having right now, in that you say, can one ever really apologize for a genocide? How can one apologize for a genocide? You're a few years into this project right now, so I want to know your thinking on this, whether it's grown or not. Is it possible to apologize for a genocide, AA?
Well, of course, it's physically possible, and that's what I'm doing. But No, in the big picture, no. There's nothing that can be said. There's no way to make up for what was done. That's impossible. It's just the more I look at it, or the more I study it, the more immense and tragic the events become. It's just unbelievable, really unbelievable. We spent a lot of time in the archive at the Glenbow Museum, and it's very interesting because the events of the 3 weeks leading up to the burning down of the buildings are not evident anywhere in the archive. For example, in any sort of journals or records, the pages of that 3-week period have been torn out. Mm-hmm. And even in Toronto, when we did some research here in Toronto as well, like microfiche had been destroyed from that period, where we knew that, for example, there was a Globe article about the uprising. And in the records of the Anglican Church, there was no such uprising, just Tim's was reassigned to a different church after some vague trouble. And the story was it was really erased from history. And it was through the very vigilant, intense research by my assistant, Ben Miller, that we were able to reassemble the story. And of course, the story comes from the dinner table. It comes from stories that my father told and my grandfather told. We had to kind of reassemble history that had been erased.
And it brings to mind a couple of things. One is how many stories are erased? How many stories do we not know? How many stories aren't being told? How many other things are demolished and deleted from our archives? And it continues even now. I mean, I looked up your great-grandfather on Wikipedia, and the only thing it said was that he had done translations of the Bible. This is still not being talked about. And I don't want to give people the impression that I'm talking about this project as if it's done, for a couple of reasons. One is AA saying, well, there's no way to really apologize for this. There's no period at the end of the sentence. And Adrian, because I know that this project is continuing, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay, tell me about that.
No, absolutely. When AA made the apology at the Toronto Biennale, he actually brought out the elders to witness. And before that, part of the process for me was actually approaching our chief and council, explaining what AA wanted to do in relation to the apology, getting their blessing, in a sense, to go and receive the apology. And so we did that, and that was sort of that sort of time where we're able to sort of, the elders there feel it and bring it back. And so part of that also was that sharing the apology with nation members. The book itself has been distributed widely on the nation. And there's another part to it. AA was to come back this spring, but as we all know, COVID sort of changed everything in our worlds. And at that time, we were doing a powwow. It's my responsibility, since I've been directly interacting with AA, to sponsor a powwow, in particular a round dance, where the community comes together. AA would make the apology at the community, and then we would dance together and then feast together. And really that would sort of round out the apology in all. But I often look at this as a lifelong process. The trust that existed between us as peoples was broken many years ago. And it really takes individuals to rebuild that trust. So between AA and I, we've been building that trust. And as I mentioned earlier, he's really gone about it, the apology, very respectfully and very intentfully. And so for us to see that and to feel that is very heartwarming. And so the people, there's a point that we need to celebrate that. And so that's what the sort of final phase. But I do believe that our friendship will now last a lifetime. And that speaks a lot to the importance of conciliation and what we can do individually.
Are you changed? Like, are you changed as a person from the beginning of this project until now?
I believe so. It's interesting. More recently, I was submitting my claim for the day school, and going through all the past certs that I experienced, and sort of feeling that sadness,
Of course.
that anger, that history.
Yeah.
But I have to say that the process of working with AA on this has, I guess, has been healing. I do have a better sense, or a sense of wellness, calmness, all those things. So I believe it's an important step in my own personal journey. And I know for the elders who were present, they felt very much the same, that, they really felt somebody listened to them. And in listening to them, that hurt and that anger, that resentment, all those things that come with that history, is somewhat lessened. It never will ever go away. But at the same time, as you build trust, as you build friendships, as you come to know and come to understand that, in the hearts of many people, there is a willingness to change and to address these things and move forward in a good way. So in seeing that, it certainly, I guess, gives us hope that other people will start doing this and actually really, start walking the walk of an apology.
AA, same question to you. From the conception of this project until now, how do you feel changed?
How do I feel?
Changed. Similar to what I asked Adrian there.
I changed. Well, I'm not sure that anybody ever changes, but certainly I've been diving deep into it. So in that sense, I'm changed. And I think in particular, I understand much better my father and my relationship to my father and his relationship to his father.
How do you mean?
His father's relationship to his father, especially on the male side of the family, I understand things that I never understood before.
Because there's a history of trauma in your family. I mean, your father, I believe, ran away from home, and your grandfather continued the sort of the tradition of residential schools that your great grandfather had said.
Yeah.
I understand what you mean there.
Yeah. And well, it's a much bigger story than that, but that's the central core of it, I guess.
Can you speak to me a little bit more about how you understand the relationship between the male lineage in your family?
Oh my God!
If you're able to, I mean, it's not if it's not too painful.
Well, no, I could do it more metaphorically. I mean, I immediately think of two experiences I had. They're both a little bit, new agey, if you don't mind that.
Of course.
This
is CBC.
In one, I was being led through, in a workshop in my late 40s. I was being led through a visualization, and I was lying alone in the dark with just one person guiding the visualization, and what I had this vision suddenly of and it struck me as very weird because at that time my father was alive, I believe, and I didn't have really any relationship to him at all. And I had this intense feeling of suddenly I could see my father on my left side, my father, and over him, his father, and over him, his father. And I could see all this kind of stream of fathers, of fathers, of fathers, of fathers, of fathers. And it was very, very emotional, but I didn't really know what it was. I really had no idea what it was or what it was about, but I knew that it was something big that was kind of coming my way, And that was maybe the beginning of the feeling of the intensity of it. And then the other thing, which is like a different version of the same thing in a way, I went to see a very old psychic in New York at the end of the 80s, Reverend Bias, who had founded a national church, the Universal Psychic Church or something like that. It was a church for psychics. And they were all over the US. There was quite a lot of them. And he was a famous psychic. And I went to see him. And the very first thing he said was, before I say anything else, I just have to say that over your right shoulder, you have, and he described my great grandfather exactly. As he looked towards the end of his life, it could have been any priest in a way, but with the big white beard and so on and so forth. And then over your left shoulder, he said a native, like a chief. And he described in enormous detail this costume. And he said, they're your two guides in life. And so, there's something waiting for you there. As soon as, I don't remember any of the session outside of that at all. That's all I remember. And as soon as I got out, I phoned my father, who was still alive then, and I asked him about this, the native person. And he said, oh, that's Old Son. He said, that's unmistakable because only Old Son dressed like that. So those two kind of oddball events kind of frame that.
Well, I'm understanding even more what you said about you've been hurtling towards this for 7 decades.
There's a lot of stories along the way that I could tell. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to be clear here, and maybe this is a good way to close things off. Is that we've been talking a little bit about the past here. We've been talking about reckoning with AA's family history, and in many ways the history of settlers in Canada, of white people in Canada, of colonization in Canada, and we've been talking a little bit about the history of yourself, Adrian, and your family's history. But is this apology, and you sort of touched on this, Adrian, I kind of want you to expand on it if you can. How is this apology also about the future? How is this apology not just about the past, but about envisioning a better future?
I like the saying that if you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you're going. And so I think that part of this is understanding that history and understanding the mistakes that were made, and also looking at that history, finding ways that we can move together into the future. And I think that here and now, relationships are built between individuals, and it's those relationships that can speak a lot to better ways of being. So I do really believe that this particular process and apology has really sort of paved the way for better future relationships. Certainly between AA and I, and also the elders, and giving a sense of hope and faith that some people are listening. I know that a lot more people need to listen, and look to ways of conciliation and creating better relationships across the country. So I think that it is looking more to the future because we're all here, and I'd hate to think about the opposite if we didn't do this, that we'd end up in nothing but conflict. So I think that we have to seek ways of being together, of living together, of understanding and visioning a future that is for all of us. And so I think this is one small part in that.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for your time. Adrian, for your perspective in your story, AA for reading that piece and your perspective in your story as well. And thank you both so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Lovely to be with you today.